The young boy in front of the gallery opened the plain single door. In a firm voice he announced the arrival of Gaius Fabricius Licinius to a bare chamber. Then he bid Gaius enter. The room was long and flat, marked by repeating blue and yellow pillars down either side, holding up a ceiling painted to portray a chaotic bushland. No part drew the eye in particular, and so Gaius felt uncomfortable looking anywhere but straight ahead. There was another door at the far end of this long chamber, closed. The door behind him was also now closed by the boy, and when Gaius protested, he was informed that the king was waiting for him. This was evidently not the case. Gaius walked the full length of the gallery, peering from tall, narrow windows at the city around him. The royal palace, where he had expected to be taken, was on a nearby hill, flying red banners. It was the only blotch of colour on a dull city. That is, if you discount the rich greens of the overgrown districts along the river. Gaius had not seen so much dilapidation in a long time. Such was the state of Sparta in the 270s BCE. All Greece knew of the city's fall from grace, and so the distant Romans, whose ears forever pointed east, came to know of it too. Hence the arrival of Gaius Licinius with Senate-stamped scrolls, gold and fine clothing, all of which was rudely checked and detained at the city boundary. Now he stood alone in that gallery, a wandering statue in a forgotten annex of the dying royal household. He tried both doors, locked. Fearing the worst, he tried his luck getting through the windows, but they were no wider than an upright bow by precise design. He lost perhaps an hour in growing anger before voices approached the riverward door. It opened, and a man clad in battle armor entered. He was followed by 20 stamping warriors, who lined up from one end of the gallery to the other, narrowing further still the passage in which Gaius was trapped. At the head of this passage was the ornately decorated man who had entered first. Gaius could guess who he was. King Areus, in the splendour unique to Laconia. Truly it is an honour, Gaius said. Areus bid he come closer, then replied, "We reject your offer, but you may stay the night if you wish." This was unheard of rudeness for a Roman noble, especially one who had treated with kings and strategoi all over Greece. Gaius struggled to keep a straight face, and ultimately failed. Areus found this most amusing. "We don't want to be your vassal. Is that so unusual?" he said, throwing the question out to his warriors with a wave of his arms. Their helmets did little to conceal their smirks to Gaius. You haven't even seen Rome," he said, looking from those warriors back to Areus. "Your city here does nothing to turn away its sour reputation. In fact, I will go further and state that upon examination, it is clear that tales of your deprivation are charitable, more than charitable. You sit and reek among inundations of your ancestors' spit. For Rome to treat with you would be like a king adopting a street urchin as his heir, and you will forgive my harsh approach, for it seems to be your favoured method of rhetoric here, if it can be considered rhetoric of any sort. You would change your tone if you knew, if you saw the temples, the gold, the streets of endless canvas and cheer, the glimmer of shields, the spectacle of theatre, the justice, the old Roman justice grasped from warlords like you. You would see it and weep to know that our city's triumphs overshadow anything a son of Laconia ever imagined." Finally out of breath, Gaius relented. Areus was plain-faced throughout, and in the end nodded. "I should like to see it," he said. Gaius stared at him in disbelief. "Ambrosius, will you go with our guest to confirm his claims?" One of the warriors stepped forwards and bowed to the king. "My king, I will tell you the whole truth, be it in pleasure or shame," he said. "Superb. I say you set off at once. I'm sure you will not object, Barbaroi?" The envoy had been called that before, but from the mouth of King Areus it was the deepest insult he, or perhaps all Rome, had ever faced. Still he nodded with steady lips, drew a long breath, and then managed a smile. "I trust you will agree to our terms upon confirmation of our ability as your protector," he asked. "Oh yes, yes," Areus nodded. "If Rome is all you say it is, then you can have your run of Sparta until your heart beats its last." With this, the audience was over. It was a year before Ambrosius returned. One would be forgiven for assuming that Sparta's ails had worsened in that time. A great many of its citizens appeared to be living in widespread camps on the outskirts, among them King Areus. In Greece it was widely lamented that Sparta's allotted time was over. There were plenty in those camps who agreed. There was a gathering to celebrate Ambrosius's return, spoiled by the retinue of Roman officials who had come with him. They openly sneered at the pitiful sight of thousands of tents and the vista of a wall-less city stricken with fire damage and unwashed streets. "Did you see what we needed to see?" Areus asked of Ambrosius before crowds of young men flocking into the dusty campground. Ambrosius gave a slow nod with a wide smile. Areus smiled back. "You have come to provide us aid," he said to the Roman delegation. "Mighty king, we are moved to tears by the plight of your people," one of them said. "Mighty king, we cannot ignore the foul fortunes of Laconia. With Roman arms you can take back your rightful place as the hegemons of all Greece," another said. Areus looked to the crowd, appearing impressed. The crowd, growing denser each moment, appears to be holding back laughter. "That is very generous, very generous. But you can give us more," Areus said. "Surely you cannot bargain with the well-being of your people. Look at the peril they endure to stay by your side, even as your city returns to the earth," an envoy protested. Now the crowd could contain themselves no longer and laughed freely. The delegation looked around, unsure whether to be disgusted or terrified. Areus laughed too as he walked back and forth on the wooden platform raised half a man above the rest of the campground. On either end were guards no older than 14 at a glance, holding undecorated spears and shields. Areus took a spear from one of them, and at once it appeared a much more menacing implement to the Romans. The king held the spear aloft and addressed the gathered crowd. "They say Rome will soon be master of all the world. They say that we should bow to them, so that we might live on the glory that washes over their cups. I hear all this, and I say, carpenter, bring me 400 sturdy ships. We shall climb the chains they dangle above us and be lifted face to face. Then we can talk of who is the master of the world. And, people of Sparta, let me show you how well I talk." The spear left Areus' hands like it was launched from a ballista, piercing the foremost Roman through the chest and almost entirely passing out the other side. The Roman fell, but the spear dug into the dirt and propped his body up. The crowd burst out in ecstatic cheers, while the remaining Romans quivered speechless. Around the campground, tents were flung open and streams of women brought out steel-tipped spears, brilliantly painted shields, tall plumed helmets, thick embossed chestplates, and wide, dazzling greaves. The crowd equipped these pieces with a ravenous hunger as horns and drums sounded. The Romans couldn't believe their eyes, and thought again of the ruin the city had come to. Only then did some of them suppose that all of the city's metal had been smelted into weapons, all its wood hammered into ships, all its linen dyed and strung up as military standards, and all its people set upon tests of endurance and camaraderie there in the wilderness. Even if any of them reasoned all this, they would not survive to inform the Roman Senate of this dire phoenix of Sparta. The drums and horns that sounded that day carried on as the festival of war stomped and sailed to the heart of Italia, where, on the steps of the Senate, Gaius Fabricius Luscinus looked out over the distant walls and saw their two neat columns crossing the hills. His throat clasped so tightly that he could not call out. As cries and screams began to sound all about, he found his legs fail him and he fell to the ground. When he awoke, it was the twilight of dawn. The city was quiet. At the foot of the stairs he lay upon were 10 uniform rows of warriors equipped in the Greek fashion. They were singing in unison, tapping their spears on the ground with the melody. Areus beamed wildly up at him from their head. Gaius found that a gang of tall-shielded men were suddenly dragging him up the steps. he was pulled into a formation of shaking guardsmen before the doors of the Senate. These men, old, young, but rarely in between, saw his patrician's robes and started desperately asking him what to do. Gaius could only stutter out requests for courage. Then the Greek song halted, and the slow clap of 100 feet hitting the first step at once sent a jolt through the soldiers. With a deep roar between each step, the Spartans ascended to the Senate. Their pace was unchanged even as they trod across Gaius's bloodied body and the bodies of all that had stood there, trapped against the Senate wall. Areus pushed open the dripping red doors and strode into his new palace, there above the magnificent city of New Sparta.